So I've been sharing a bit about my private sessions with the channel JM for the Way of Mastery. So he would sit down, go into the trance with Jeshua. This is how I learned to be a channel, was through JM and through Jeshua in my sessions with him. Then Jeshua would start, now we begin, and then I would have the opportunity to ask him questions for an hour and a half. So we're getting near the end of the sessions, and I was remembering a few things, and I remembered to finally ask this question. I said, well, Jeshua, you talk about oneness and individuation both, and this is a big issue in spirituality. Do we lose our oneness? Is oneness and is individuation and separation the same thing? He actually says in The Way of Mastery somewhere, actually, that's just the opposite of that. Individuation, the belief that individuation and separation are the same thing, is the error. That the individuation's all an aspect of the oneness. You know, a wave on the ocean. You know, they're not separate, but they are individuated. He also shares at one point that this individuation, this is in an early years channeling in The Way of Mastery called Death and Earth Changes. I'm pretty sure that's where it is. And people say, is there really any difference between, you know, Jesus and Mary and so on? Or is this all one Godhead, or whatever you want to call it? Jeshua's answer is, oh no, there's absolutely unique expression. And in individuation, he refers to it as your cosmic social security number, which you'll never lose. And then he jokes, and you never have to pay into, and it's all always overflowing. That's an early years Way of Mastery channeling. And so he's made it very clear that individuation is something which is an eternal aspect of who we are, of our eternal soul. But also that we're one, and that God is one, that there's no duality, there's no separation. So it's hard to get a sense of what is he actually talking about when he's talking about what we'd call us. What are we? This is really almost the ultimate question. What am I? What are we? And he gives in The Way of Mastery, and it was in this private session with me, he gave it the most satisfying answer I've ever heard to this essential question. Now, so I asked, Joshua, what are you talking about? What's this individuated self, this soul, or how would you define what each of us are? Now, he said at one point, it's like the best way that we can describe this, and this is part of The Way of Mastery channelings, in your language, is to say, there's a sunbeam from the sun, and you're the sunbeam, and God is the sun. And yet, you know you're the created, not the creator. And yet you can't find a gap at any point between the sunbeam and the sun. So that's how he describes it. But when I asked in the sessions I had, I said, what are we? What are we? And what he said was, best to think of it, this is if you're thinking, best to think of it as a unique, loving thought in the mind of God. I loved that. That's the most beautiful, satisfying answer to that question I've ever heard. We're a unique, loving thought in the mind of God. So why would we want to not have that? Why would we want to lose that individuation? And you can see that because that's an part of God, that God would be incomplete without each of us, which is what it says in the Course, and which feels true to me, which is a beautiful teaching. So that was one of the final things that happened in my sessions with Jeshua. Now, I'm getting to the end of the sessions, and I'm feeling sad about it. And I have learned increasingly to hear him, and I'm having a regular dialogue with him. So it's more like I'm attaching to him, and I don't want him to go because I love the sessions. It's such a beautiful, personal feeling, like talking to an old friend. And I'm sad about, I have this sense it's going to be ending soon because I've been grandfathered in for years. He hasn't been taking new clients for a long time. And I'm sensing it coming to a close. But he had in a session earlier, and I think I shared this in the last video, or 2 videos ago, he'd said, basically confirmed this idea that the most loving story of any event, person, place, or thing is always the truest perception of it. So that's a good one to live by. The most loving story is always the truth. So we look for, there's a guy named Malcolm Gladwell who wrote these books, and his contention was that there are no prodigies in human history. Nobody's born with all these gifts. And there's one thing you have to do, and with people like Mozart and Picasso, the reason that they seem to be prodigies is because they were given this training at a very young age. What you need to do in order to master any discipline, to truly become a master of a discipline in a human form, is 10,000 hours of practice. 10,000 hours of practice, that's 5 years solid. And I think it's true. This has been my experience with observing people. So, okay, if you're going to be a painter, if you're going to be a musician, you got to put in your 10,000 hours. If you're going to be a scientist, an architect, or whatever it is, really to really master the trade, or at least start getting there. But what if your goal is spiritual mastery? And a lot of people think, oh, if I get the ideas right, I'll have spiritual mastery. Or if some magical thing happens, I'll have spiritual mastery. Or if I devote myself to some guru or avatar or whatever. That's not the way it works. It's the way that it works is just like the way it works with everything else. You got to practice, and you got to put in your 10,000 hours. But the question becomes, okay, well, 10,000 hours doing what? Doing good works, doing what? And I would submit that no, the 10,000 hours needs to be 10,000 hours of loving thought, of just exactly what Jeshua said here, finding the most loving story for any experience that's occurring, the most meaningful story. And one meaningful story is that it's always being done for a good reason, a loving reason. Every event in the history of the world, it's just some of them it takes longer to see. Imagine those who knew him at that time, how long it might take them to process the goodness of the crucifixion and the resurrection. They had just lost someone dear to them, and their community gets slaughtered by the Romans, slaughtered. So, but long term, that one seems like a pretty good choice, right, in terms of what the good that came out of it. So it's true for everything. And if we want to really have spiritual mastery, to stop allowing these unloving thoughts to fill our minds. I'm not saying I've mastered it. I'm saying I think that I've been told what the path is to mastery. And learn this skill of being able to look at a situation in which you've got a judgmental thought, oh, that shouldn't be the way it is. They shouldn't be doing that. So-and-so's evil, whatever. And just don't accept it anymore, because it's an illusion. You're hallucinating. So stop hallucinating. Stop playing the game of hallucinating. And if you're going to listen to Jeshua and listen to these teachings, the most profound teachings in history, in my opinion, and the truest ones, and if you want to be on that pursuit, then it's going to be required to discipline the mind, and it's an enjoyable process, but this is the 10,000 hours of work, to look at a situation and to bless it, is in a sense, in your own mind, with a loving thought about it. Oh, they're just trying to manipulate me into going to the movies. Well, what's a loving thought about that? Oh, well, I don't know. Turn it around. What's a loving thought? Oh, it's so wonderful that they're always trying to expose me to new experiences. I mean, and it may seem insincere, but what Jeshua is saying is that it's always sincere. It's always truthful to see the loving thought in the loving situation. So I'd had that session with him in which he'd said the loving story is always true. And for the last few sessions, every time I'd ask him a question, his answer would basically be, unless he was revealing some deeper thing, if I was asking a certain kind of question, he'd say, well, beloved friend, why are you asking me this when you already know that the loving story is true? So through this period of 9 years, one thing I noticed was he never offered a crutch. It was always about empowering the student and getting the student to, and he's so patient, because I was so afraid and going through so much stuff. But at the end of it, I came out, and I've had much less fear since. And the things, and I was going through a while back, just as a testimony to my pathway, to the pathway, the way of mastery. I was reading Reader's Digest. I was going through a really challenging time in my life. I had a disabled brother who was in the hospital, and 2 elderly parents, and 2 close, a nephew and a niece who had passed, and financial troubles, and all kinds of troubles, all at once. And there was a list in Reader's Digest of 8 life events you could be going through. And they said that stressful life events, they said if you're going through more than 2 at a time, that there was a 75% chance you'd develop a major illness. And when I looked at it, I realized I'd been going through 6 of them together all at once, 6 of them for 3 years. And only because of the way of mastery and step by step by step by step, how is this for me? What is coming? Why is this here now? Why is this my will at a deeper level? What's the meaning in this? Because it's meaning. It's not just crushing my life, all these things. And while it was incredibly challenging this time, I know that I got through it because of the way of mastery. And because of these basic principles, this training my mind to not tolerate unloving thoughts that would crush me in that situation if I allowed them. But mostly because in my pursuit of truth, I believed that the loving thoughts were true. It had been proven to me that they were. So we're not talking about love as something nice or preferable or fake or papering something over. We're talking about truth, that love is truth. And that's what this pathway is about. That's what these sharings are about. And that's what life's about. It's about coming back to the recognition, if you choose to. You can play your game of suffering as long as you want. It's okay. It's blessed. God says it's okay. It's fine. Play hide and seek. It's fine. But if you want to understand the truth, you've got to understand the nature of reality, which is giving you the freedom to create your own experience. And that nature is love. Love is power. Love is God. Thank you for listening.